Today is Sunday, December 8th, 2024, and this is episode 288 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I am awesome. How are you?
I'm good. I'm experimenting with some new audio settings on this program. So we've had some good feedback of some weird audio bobbles that we're trying to get better at. So hopefully this is a little better. If not, please let me know. I will keep fiddling and adjusting settings until we get it as good as we can.
Yep. Same. It feels like every time I start recording, it's an adventure in audio. So I've got to get that sorted out.
For those who don't know our setup, it's pretty complicated. It's a lot more complicated than just plugging the mic into the computer. Jerry's got a whole mixer board that his mic goes through, and out of the mixer board into the camera so that the HDMI output matches the audio and the video. My audio is going out into my camera and then coming out with an adapter that turns it into like a USB feed. It's more complicated than I thought it was going to be, but it produces a better result when everything's working properly.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you have, we're using little Nikon mirrorless SLR type cameras.
Yeah, the Z30s, right?
Yeah, and if you don't route the audio through the camera, you end up with quite often this kind of inconsistent lag where it looks like one of those Chinese action movies where your audio is not synced up with the movements of your mouth. So we're trying to like do good stuff, and it can be challenging.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway is we care about doing high quality work. So if you see something weird, let us know. We'll try to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I moved my camera again, trying to get a better camera eye line. So we'll keep trying. We'll get it right.
All right. So just a reminder, the same reminder that we always do, but the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So with that, our first story today comes from Apple Insider, and the title here is What a New Threat Report Says About Mac Malware in 2024.
Jerry, Macs don't get malware.
I know, Mac. So that was the thing that surprised the heck out of me was I thought Macs couldn't get malware.
I thought by law, like.
Yeah, like Steve Jobs must be just spinning in his grave.
Obviously, we're being facetious.
Yeah. So it's a kind of an interesting report, and it really highlights that Macs are kind of going through what I would characterize as the same kind of industrialization of malware as many other platforms. But the report also points out that there's some kind of, important distinctions as compared to like Windows malware, where, Windows malware has lots of different, different attack vectors. And what they're saying in this report is that most of the methods that this malware ends up on or infecting Macs is through social engineering. It's not necessarily through technical attacks. It's not, by the way, they don't say that is exclusively the case. They do point out that there were a few instances of vulnerabilities that malware was taking advantage of, although it sounds like that was predominantly privilege escalation. It was still, I think even in those instances, using social engineering to actually land on the system. The thing that I thought interesting is that a lot of IT people these days are using Macs.
Yeah.
And a lot of administrators are using Macs, and a lot of by the way, there's some goodness in that in terms of security. You're typically not susceptible to many of the same kinds of lateral movement attacks that you would see in a Windows environment, and that's goodness when you've got you got your IT administrators with elevated rights and access to systems. That's not a terrible thing, but I think it also has perhaps created a bit of a false sense of security. And one of the things they point out in this post is that there are the malware, I should say, the malware types that they're seeing are info stealers. So they're
Right.
not necessarily destructive type. I think they do point out that there is ransomware attacking Macs, but they point out that it's predominantly info stealers. Password capture, secrets, pulling secrets down, copying clipboards, that sort of thing, which is not
Yeah,
something you'd want to have happen on an administrator workstation.
no, it's interesting. There's a couple thoughts on here, and I've got some familiarity with running Macs in the enterprise. I've done both Windows Macs. In general, I would say that the Mac malware environment has not been nearly as active as Windows because of lots of reasons. I don't think it's just the inherent capabilities of Mac, though they're not bad. I think that for a long time, the bad guys didn't see the market share was worth going after Macs, and now that's starting to change. Right. I think you were hinting at something that I think, which is that a lot of high value targets use Macs. So you usually can get more bang for the buck if you can land on a Mac in many cases, I think. The other thing I would say is the manageability from an enterprise perspective is not as robust as a Windows environment. Now, that's a pro con, right? You've got that whole trust relationship and you've got all those tools out there, but I would say it's not. I would say the Mac ecosystem for manageability is not as mature from an enterprise perspective as you see with Windows. The other thing I would say is that the security software is not nearly as robust for Mac as you see for Windows. You go look at a piece of software, let's just pick on an EDR provider, and you go look at, and they run on Mac and Windows endpoints, amongst others. And, they have their laundry list of capabilities. You start looking at the asterisks, there's a lot of them of Windows only, Windows only, Windows only, Windows only, that they don't exist on the Mac. So there's a whole kind of balanced trade-off of ecosystem here. But I do think it's important that people understand that Macs are not invulnerable. And they do have ways to be attacked, especially third-party software, browsers, other things on the system can be attacked. This particular article seems to mainly focus on the operating system side of things, which is fine and it's important. But I think there's also a lot of third-party apps that can be attacked on various Macs and whatnot. But in general, I think Macs are decently secure systems. They have a lot of smart things, which is why this report, I think, is saying the majority of the successful attacks are using some sort of social engineering to convince the user to do something they shouldn't. And in an enterprise environment, that sort of whole concept of should somebody have admin versus not have admin comes into play with Macs, but it's a little more complicated in some ways. So I could sort of soapbox on this one for a little while, but I think the key takeaway for me is people need to realize Macs can be successfully attacked today.
Yeah, exactly. That was the thing that I wanted to impress on here is that it is there's no magic. It is a failable system. However, again, they, as you mentioned, they point out that most of these malware strains, unless they trip over some vulnerability that hasn't been patched yet, they're really relying on people to install something with elevated privileges, to turn off some security setting and enable the malware to actually do its thing. So, and what there were really two recommendations in this post. Is mitigations. One was education, which I think we've talked about this to death. That can take you so far, and then more sophisticated security tools like EDR. But as you just pointed out, a lot of the capabilities around, baked into EDR are focused on Windows based threats because that's where the attackers are. But I would expect over time, if there is a shift, a significant shift from I don't think we'll ever see a shift away from Windows attacks. But if we start to see an increase in attacks on Macs, I think we would see a corresponding increase in sophistication of the tools available. But there'll be some lag. I mean, it's just the way the world works.
Yeah, it's true. I also think it's fairly common for executives to have their preferential operating system, and sometimes that's not what the mainline operating system is in the company. And now I'm dealing with a mixed environment that I may not have parity from a security and manageability and logging and visibility standpoint, which can
Mm-hmm.
lead to some interesting problems from a manageability standpoint.
Yeah, 100%. All right, our next story comes from Krebs and Security. And the title here is Why Fishers Love New TLDs like .shop, .top, and .xyz. Now, I think most everybody's quite familiar with the generic top-level domains. I mean, there's, I think, hundreds of them, if not thousands of them at this point. But this article is pointing out that the economics behind these generic top-level domains in some instances is creating what I'll call an attractive nuisance. And he points out that some of these domains can be registered for as little as $1 or in some instances even less. And that leads to bad actors who don't want to burn a lot of money on domains that they're basically going to get taken down after a certain amount of time. It becomes a financially viable method of attack for them. And so in this article, there's a kind of a ranked list of the TLDs, how common they are, and how many domains have been reported as being associated with crime. And .top, interestingly, is the top one. And I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't realize that just under 1/3 of all .top domains were reported as malicious in 2020. Was this 2024?
That's impressive.
And it's not 2024 is not over yet. So
Makes you wonder if you're just better off just blocking .top like you block country IP ranges.
that when I read this, that was actually the thought that went through my mind. I don't know that certainly there's a lot of vanity type domains. 2/3, we could say, well, 1/3 of them are malicious. Kind of by definition, that means maybe 2/3 of them aren't, or some percentage aren't. And so you would, I think it would behoove you to take more of a allow list approach. So to block it, and then if there's something, some legitimate resource that you need, then allow that. But as a broad spectrum, there's a lot of bad stuff happening on .top.
Yeah.
I did like one of the comments in here. They're interviewing this person who is the author of the book Internet for Dummies and the president of one of the anti-abuse organizations. And he said selling to criminals and spammers turns out to be a lousy business, and by that he means domains, selling domains. You can charge whatever you want for the first year, but you have to charge list price on domains for renewals. With criminals and spammers, they never renew. And so the point was that in order to get into the business of running one of these generic top-level domains, you have to put a pretty significant investment in, as you might imagine. It's like on the order of $500,000 a year just in kind of like pay to play, plus all of the operations and infrastructure and whatnot that you would have to operate. And
Is
so
that why you haven't launched the .llama top level domain yet?
it is. It is. I'm still saving up for that. Yes.
All right. Well, maybe Santa will bring you a top level domain for Christmas.
That would be fun. That would certainly be fun. So in any event, these registrars are incentivized to sell large quantities. So when a company or a customer comes and wants to buy a large number of domains, they'll often do it for very cheap, and quite often those are not above board transactions. But the registrar has an incentive to play along. But the point is that while that might be a good like one time infusion of cash, they're not going to renew those, right?
Right.
They're going to get burned. So
you're never going to get into profitability on that particular customer.
yeah. I also thought it was very interesting that they pointed out that from a trend perspective, and it's not hard to see, like, by the way, it's not hard to see, we all get spam, right? We all get spam. We all get phishing emails. We all get, all sorts of crap. Like, this is not a unique thing. And I'm sure we've all seen .top and some of these other TLDs appear in these questionable links we get. But what they point out here is that there's actually a movement away from parking these, phishing sites or malware sites and onto subdomains of larger properties like blogspot.com and pages.dev and Weebly and whatnot, where they don't have to pay. It's just the process of registering, and in some instances, you can set these up very fast. You can be all automated through APIs and whatnot. And though Blogspot is for the average person is kind of a pain in the ass to set up, there are people, and I can tell you firsthand, there are people who have figured out how to mass create Gmail accounts and Blogspot accounts and kind of the whole way through. So that doesn't surprise me, but it is not something I expected to see. So it's from a trend perspective, I would certainly block Top and maybe some of the others. Take an allow list approach, but also be aware that things like Blogspot, some of the other sites that are perhaps have lots of legitimate tenants are starting to become malicious too. And that, by the way, creates a problem. Like we've seen this with GitHub, right? Where GitHub has been used to deliver or distribute malware. And it's very effective because you can't, like at your firewall, at your network, you can't say, I'm going to let all of GitHub through except for this one repository or what have you. So I think that's the challenge that we have with some of these. You can't, it's binary. You allow blogspot.com through or you don't.
Yeah, and it also breaks URL reputation filtering that's based on like recently registered or newly seen. I don't think they go to that level of like a subdomain in a blog spot like you would. Hey, like llama.llama just got registered. I'm not going to trust it.
Right. I suppose if you're using like content filters, those are as we've talked about in the past, right? TLS interception is kind of a problem for a lot of people. And I know that many organizations don't even do it anymore, especially with some of the privacy regulations. They just don't even do it anymore. So
I think there's a lot of tension there between that and securing the enterprise that isn't well understood yet, honestly.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely.
I think well, we're seeing this play out in the U.S. telcos right now. The concept of security with a backdoor for law enforcement being abused by bad actors is a great example of this sort of security versus privacy monitoring oversight. And I'm not taking a stance on this show on that one way or the other, but it's very difficult to have a backdoor that can't be abused by a bad actor. And I think we see that. So I don't know though. As somebody charged with trying to keep an enterprise safe, being able to monitor TLS connections is a very handy tool to try to limit what the bad guys are up to.
Well, especially since it is part of the scheme to help prevent a larger data breach. And so, you know, in the spirit of protecting your employee and customer data, you may have to, you may have to monitor certain things that are maybe not popular, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a different equation when we're talking about individual personal data versus company data on company machines.
Right.
And, you know, I'm sure there are some folks who completely disagree with this, but most acceptable use policies and corporate policies allow full unfettered monitoring of all activity on company devices.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't say that for the purposes of like spying. I think it's or eavesdropping or anything like that. It's really a matter of ensuring that the packets flowing into your network aren't malicious, and when they come in through a TLS tunnel, you're not able to inspect that and apply detonation or what have you. You don't know, and that's a big channel. Like that's a big avenue of attack. It's not the only avenue of attack, but we see like a pendulum. These attacks swing from kind of infrastructure focused to user focused, back to infrastructure and back. So, if you don't have the ability to effectively monitor, at least at a network level, that user traffic, your all your eggs are now in the basket of your EDR solution or what have you. So,
yep.
Anyhow,
agreed.
Moving on to our next one, which comes from Bleeping Computer. And the title here is Novel Phishing Campaign Uses Corrupt Word Documents to Evade Security. So
this one's clever. I was impressed by this one.
It is. Yeah. So a lot of organizations now have fairly sophisticated email security gateways that will attempt to detonate or otherwise inspect attachments coming through. And this one actually, this attack technique actually intentionally corrupts Word documents, but it corrupts them in a way that Word is able to reliably recover from. And so as a recipient of one of these documents, your copy of Microsoft Word is able to open it up and say, hey, this document is corrupted. Would you like us to do a recovery? And you say yes. And it can actually recover it. But the challenge is that most of the tools that do an analysis apparently aren't that sophisticated. Now, the contra to that, by the way, is that once you do recover it, it's basically a text document that has an embedded QR code. So it's not like it has malware built into it. So let's not.
But I'm guessing it's like it's keeping your anti-malware technology from following that QR code to see what's on the other end.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's the magic, right? It's obscuring a link and enticing the recipient to use their phone to scan that QR code. And when you scan the QR code, it takes you to a web page that looks like a Microsoft, login page. We've talked about this ad nauseum about how there are now, as a service offerings where you can set up, sites to host and then intercept login sessions for Microsoft accounts. And I'm assuming that that's what's actually being used in this instance. So an interesting lure. I think after that, everything proceeds as expected, right? They're gonna get into your email, steal your email. They're going to run a business email compromise type attack. They're going to try to, deploy ransomware. Who knows? The sky's the limit once they get your credentials. But this is, yet another way that the bad guys are if trying to come up with creative ways of evading your defenses. And I think, by the way, from a if you think about like the average worker, the average remote worker, especially, your computer, your laptop is VPN'd into your company's network. You get this email, it's got an attachment that's corrupted. It's branded to your company. It has a reasonable sounding lure, and it has a QR code. And what are you going to use to scan that QR code? Your phone. Well, your phone isn't going to be VPN, probably not, at least VPN'd into your company's network. And if it's an iPhone, as an example, it's not going to have any security software on it that's going to be able to reasonably detect things. So, I think it's relying on a bit of a hole in the bucket around mobile devices. So,
yep.
There you have it.
Though a good counter is, phishing resistant credentials
Yeah,
in some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Proper SSO, proper passkeys, whatever it is, could help fight this sort of thing. I mean, if somebody falls for it and they give over their creds, but the creds are phishing resistant, doesn't matter. In theory, I mean, there's always the devil's always in the details, but that's the theory at least.
Well, I think over time we're going to continue to bang up against the reality that we have to expedite our movement to phishing resistant credentials.
Yeah, I agree. And for the record, I want you to know that I left that alone as a your mom joke about banging up against something.
I appreciate your sacrifice there.
I just didn't feel it, but it was there. It was set up, but it's been a tough week. I just you got to feel it. You got to feel it in your gut to make it land. And I just
the moment wasn't right.
But I just want credit for resisting a badly framed joke this one time.
Noted. So noted. We will record that in your performance review.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. The last story, and there's actually two links for this, comes from also Bleeping Computer, and the title is Ultralytics AI model hijacked to infect thousands with crypto miner.
Rude.
Totally rude. Now, certainly not the worst thing that could happen to a computer. As I've talked about in the past, if you're going to get hacked and somebody's going to do something on your computer, running a crypto miner isn't the worst thing in the world because it's relatively simple to detect and isn't really going to steal your data necessarily. But the story here is something that we've seen happen quite a lot, where a bad actor has found their way into a repository, GitHub repository, and planted some malware. So that part is relatively, I think, straightforward. There is a complimentary blog post of I'm not even sure how this person is related to the whole thing, but he put together a very comprehensive sequence of events and timeline like I've not seen happen in a little while. And I think it was possible because this is all happening on a public GitHub repository. The software that this company produces is open source. And so basically there appears like there was a couple of GitHub action vulnerabilities that allowed an attacker to run some commands as part of the CI/CD pipeline, and that allowed them to obtain some credentials. They used those credentials to inject some malicious code, And that resulted in two releases that contained the crypto miner. They subsequently released, they were informed of the issue. They were subsequently released a clean version. And then I think it was 2 days later, another one or two releases, again, malicious releases were pushed out again. This time through it appears like the attacker used some credentials stolen in the first attack that gave access to the PyPy library where the attacker uploaded the malicious version. So the first one was they modified the GitHub repository, went through all of the release process, and that ended up on PyPy as well. That got taken down. They released a good version. The second instance, the adversary actually uploaded the infected library directly to PyPy, not going through the GitHub release process. And I think the thing that I wanted to cover in this is the complexity that and diligence that you have to put in after an attack. Now, the first attack, you can say, well, like that was not that was not great. But when you look under the covers, like that's really obscure stuff. Mistakes like that can happen, and they will happen, and it's bad, and we need to do everything we can to avoid it. But we're starting to see a trend of this. We saw it most recently with Internet Archive, very similar kind of, attack path, right? They were attacked and hacked, got cleaned up, and they came back because there were still authentication secrets that had been stolen and not rotated. I think as a industry, especially when you've got something like an open source repository, where maybe it's not the same level of, like, there isn't a necessarily like an incident response team, right? I think that's where we start running into some of these issues where it's the actions that we have to take to clean up are perhaps more onerous and more complex, more thorough than they might seem at first blush. And I think if we don't get more serious about this, we're gonna keep seeing this sort of thing happen. And at the moment, by the way, I don't want to say it's benign, because it's not benign. I don't want to downplay the significance of what happened here, but it's by far, it's far from like a worst case scenario. Like, you can absolutely imagine a much more horrific set of circumstances than deploying a crypto miner. But this is, and it will happen, by the way. Like, that's going to happen. It's going to end up with ransomware. It's going to end up with, info stealers. Who knows? So, and maybe if it's an info stealer, like, it's happening all the time already, and we just don't know it because, it's not, the only reason we know it, this is happening, is because somebody saw their CPU spiking 100% and said, "Oh, what the heck is going on?" But, look, we have to get more serious about this.
First of all, if you're not leveraging the GPU in the system, you're just not doing it right. Let's just be clear.
It's true. Why are my fans spinning?
Amateurs. No, I agree. I mean, we've got a couple things here that I wanted to comment on. One is obviously the supply chain risk of dependencies in open source and pulling in third-party dependencies, and how can you trust them? And I don't know that we've got that figured out yet either. And how often do you update them, and how quickly are you monitoring? And do you have some tool that's helping you know when these things happen? That's a whole problem. The other thing is, to your point on being able to clean it up well, I think that's also predicated on having a foundational knowledge, a deep understanding of the environment that a lot of teams maybe don't have, and that, I think, is a problem. Like, especially like let's. I wonder how. I'm sure they've got techniques and playbooks for this, but I think about the Mandiants of the world and these other emergency response teams that come in during an incident and try to clean it up. They're coming in cold with no knowledge of the environment, right? And they have knowledge of tactics, techniques, and procedures and what's common and what to ask, but there's there's so much complexity in modern tech environments and so many interactions and interdependencies and ways that credentials are used and APIs are used that it's really tough to know holistically enough to assure yourself that you've truly evicted a bad actor. And sometimes it's, we touched a little bit on this current telco hack that's going on with up to 8 major U.S. telcos that they still haven't been able to evict the bad actors. And we've been talking about this for months.
Yeah, and they have no horizon for when that will happen.
Which is, I mean, we don't have enough details, so I don't think we've not really talked about it much because we don't have any good details to dig into. But that's insane. Like, how is that not getting more press? That is wild. So
well, the press that it did get was, the government telling, even if unofficially, that citizens should start using encrypted applications because
I heard about that on the new DefSec Today shorts.
I know
that premiered.
Isn't that cool?
This week. So if you can't get enough of us, Jerry, and I might soon, is putting out these little sub 1 minute shorts on, I think, just YouTube at the moment, right? Is that any place else?
Just YouTube.
So if you can't get enough, find your daily dose of Jerry on YouTube Shorts. Sorry, that just turned into a complete ad. I didn't mean for that to happen.
And there's a little bit of dry humor in them too.
I thought I was the funny guy. I thought you were the straight guy.
Well, that's why I said dry humor.
I see.
Not good humor. It's not good humor. It's not Kalat level humor. Let's be honest. So one thing I do want to go back and just clarify something. I am not dogging on this company or Internet Archive or like people are doing
these are hard problems.
They're doing what they can with what they have to work with. I think, but something has to change, right? And I think it's hard to expect, roughly speaking, volunteers to know how to execute a really thorough eviction in the aftermath of a compromise like this, because like you just don't know. And somebody who owns a GitHub repository for some open source component doesn't have like the deeper pockets to go hire Mandiant. And so this is not intended to be a like bash on the little guy, but at the same time, like we've created this ecosystem that is ungodly complicated and really hard to navigate and very, very difficult to understand where the problems exist and when something bad happens, to know all the little dark corners and rugs to lift up to find where all the bad stuff happened.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing this is reminding of is there's a couple of like assured open source software repositories out there. Like Google's running one. I've never used it. I don't know how good it is. But as an example, they say that for Java and Python images, Google has tested and verified, and like they have some level of like assurance that they're secure. Mm-hmm. I have no idea if something like that would have helped in this scenario, how useful that is. I just do see that stuff out there as trying to help give some baseline of known, trusted source of these third-party dependencies. I don't know if it would have applied in this case. I honestly don't. Because this started, as far as I can tell, as like a valid PR check that was accepted by the maintainers.
Yeah, yeah. And so, reasonably so, right? I mean, I don't, other than the facts that created the vulnerability in the first place, I don't know that anybody acted really unreasonably or irrationally here. It just was an unfortunate series of events that resulted in a bad thing happen, and then an incomplete eviction process, because I my guess is the people who were trying to clean it up just never thought that was a problem, and like, I'm not surprised, right? I'm sure they're not incident response people.
Right. And they're expensive and not easy to get a hold of. And like, not everybody's just got them hanging around when you're doing volunteer open source work.
Right. Right. Everything's, one of the problems with this, and look, I've been involved in so many incidents over the years. That's why I have no hair.
How many of those did you cause versus responded to?
Most of them I caused. Let's just be clear. Um, but it's probably into the thousands, and the the common the common refrain I see is people just don't understand. They didn't even comprehend that the thing that happened could have happened, because they didn't have that context. It's one of the reasons that I really liked kind of pairing up Red Team with developers, or with, what have you, because like it gives a different context. It's like I still love it. The very popular video of the QA person, with the little shape sorter thing saying, the round peg goes into the square hole and the rectangular one goes into the square hole. And the point there was that the QA person was like horrified that somebody would not actually pair up the blocks with the associated shape, which is the issue with security. Like we have to defend against things that are attacked in ways that aren't necessarily obvious, and that's always been my experience. It's usually, I mean, there's certainly instances where people have accepted a risk that came to fruition, but those were often the minority cases, right? That didn't happen all that often. It was usually the thing that was just not in people's minds. And I think that as we're progressing down this road, we're creating these really complex systems, and we're going to see more of this.
Yeah, complex systems fail in complex ways, which is a very pithy thing to say. But I think also we may not always be able to understand a failure condition until after it happens. And then the key is learn from it and prevent it in the future, which can be the challenge.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that always struck me, was that in the context of incident response, it was always easy to understand afterwards, right? It wasn't easy to understand before. And so as we sit here today, it's easy to say, oh well, geez, like how could they not think to rotate all of the credentials involved, including the ones used for uploading into PyPy? Well, I mean, it's easy for us to sit here and say now. At the time, I doubt that even came into their conscience. And this may not be a solvable problem, by the way, in the context of like open source environments, because they don't have an incident response team. They don't have a security team. And so I think maybe the real lesson here is for those of us who work for organizations that do have a security team and do produce code and do maintain our own code repositories and whatnot. So I don't mean to be defeatist, right? But I don't see I'm not seeing the way that gets solved in the broader context, unless like GitHub or somebody comes along and radically changes how some of this technology works to be more intrinsically safe. But the reality is, I see things moving in the opposite direction. Like, I don't think there's nothing I see is telling me that's where we're going to go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, but in general, I agree. And I wonder if it behooves us, at least in the enterprise software space, to do more vetting of these third-party packages before we pull them into our code to use.
mhm.
But
All right.
yep,
So that is the
I,
show for today. I don't have a
I
cat
had one
to.
other surprise topic since we got a little bit of time,
Okay, go ahead.
and it was something you and I were chatting about over chat about a week or two ago, and you were calling bumpkiss on this theory, which is the theory of risk homeostasis. Completely off
Yes.
topic.
That's right.
So,
Yes, yes, yes.
but I this is completely out of left field for everybody who like we don't have a story or anything. It's just something I was thinking about, which is risk homeostasis. I'll just kind of quote a little bit here. It's also known as risk compensation. It's a theory that people have an acceptable level of risk that they find tolerable. It was proposed in 1982 by a psychology professor, Dr. Gerald Wild. It was originally developed and validated in the area of road safety. So the idea being the more safety devices your car added, the more safety devices the roads add, the faster somebody will drive. The more risk they will accept, or at least risky behavior. Oh, hello, the kitty cat. I was looking on a different screen. I didn't know there was a kitty cat. So come to 45 seconds or 45 minutes into the video and see, is that Nochi?
This is Noki. Yep.
Noki. I've
Noki.
completely lost my train of thought because kitty cat.
I'm
Anyway,
sorry.
it's all good. It's much more better than what I'm saying anyway. So the idea is that as more sort of risk mitigation tools are added or safety features are added, people take what would have been more risk before that, right? So they have this
Become
level of
risk
risk.
seeking. Yeah.
What would be risk seeking? But they're just going back to their baseline of acceptable level of risk, right?
Right.
They perceive that it's now less risky to drive faster because they've got these new safety features around them. And like one of the things that's quoted here is backup cameras can be useful, but then it encourages drivers to look at the camera instead of looking around the vehicle, which could cause different risk. And so, and pair this with the concept that humans aren't great at measuring risk. Where I was playing with this idea in my mind is if you're in an enterprise environment and you're a random user who has some concept of computer security, and you perceive that you're in a very mature environment with many security controls and the environment's locked down really hard, might you be less concerned on a daily basis as we ask our users to think about safe and unsafe activity because you have this unconscious perception that the environment is so locked down with safety controls, you don't have to worry about if that link is safe to click or not. As opposed to you're in a fly-by-night startup with no centralized IT environment or security environment, there's no EDR, there's nothing else, and you may inherently think of, hey, I need to do a little bit more because security is everybody's job. So the theory I'm positing is in a very developed, mature curve, up the maturity curve of security environment, are our users thinking that it doesn't matter as much and taking more risk or taking actions that we would consider risky because they perceive that the environment around them keeps them safe.
Yeah. So I certainly, I certainly said my piece on that. I think if you go back, it's difficult to say for sure in the context of IT security. But if you go back to cars, like the perennial example of this phenomenon is like crumple zones in cars and airbags and things like that, where, in the past, like back in the 40s and 50s, if you crashed your car into a tree, the car was fine, but the occupants died. Right? It was kind of the way it went. And so you had an incentive as a driver to not go so fast because, it was going to be a fatal event if you crashed your car and you were going too fast. But now, like I was driving, I posted about this on Mastodon. I was driving to Florida maybe 2 months ago, and wrong way driver was being chased by the police, and I swerved just in time, and we were going highway speed 70 miles an hour, and this car head on the car behind me, and I thought everybody certainly had perished in that. Turns out no. They were all okay. I mean, I think they were injured, but like 140 plus miles per hour combined speed
Yeah,
coming
that's
together.
crazy.
Um, so I guess you know, what I struggle with is that when we get into the car, well, our conception isn't like how safe is the car. It's not like, does my car have airbags or anti-lock brakes? I mean, certainly when it comes time for those things to come into play, that's an important thing. I really think it comes down to the comfort in the moment. Like, and I use the example of like when I'm in a go-kart and like it feels like I'm going 200 miles an hour and I'm barely keeping this thing on the road, but the reality is I'm probably not even going 25 miles per hour. And whereas when I'm in my car and I can go 90 miles per hour in my Ford Expedition because it feels like I'm like riding on glass at that
Sure.
speed. But the reality is it's not a great. It's a dangerous speed to be driving at, no matter how many safety features I have. And I think that a lot of the, I think at least in that context, it's kind of the other way around. The speeds were increased because of the safety improvements in the cars, and people want to go faster, not slower. But in the context of, if I go back to, I've been thinking about this since you put it out there. If you go back to the context of security, I don't think it's an individual user call, but I actually do think it happens. And I think it happens at the managerial and process design level, right? Like I don't know that the average person says, well, like I should or should not click or be careful about what links I click on because I think I think I don't have a great antivirus system. I mean, maybe that happens to some extent, like in the extreme case where there isn't anything. But by and large, I think the issue manifests itself when a manager or when a business leader is trying to design a process and figure out like how many safeguards should we put in. Because if I put more safeguards in, it's going to drive this price up. And so I know my company is safe. I know that we have EDR and antivirus and whatnot. And therefore, like, I just don't feel like I need to incur that additional expense to operate this process with an extra set of eyes or with, in a more safe way, or have another uh, architect look at and see if it's properly designed. I can absolutely see that happen. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know that I have a solid answer. It's just an interesting theory that I'm playing around with, and I may, now that I have it, the concept in my head, I may look around for either confirmation or refutation of that concept. And of course, my confirmation bias will win out because,
Well,
that's how
it would be an interesting academic study. We should go talk to Mr. Green.
we should. You know what? It's helpful.
Yeah.
What else is going on?
It's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, so just I know we had a few extra minutes, so I figured I'd throw it out there. And I'm sure there's more work that's been done. I have not done a lot of research on this. It's just something I happened to kind of connect to my brain as I was lying awake, not sleeping. But yeah. All right, what else? What's coming up on Getting Defensive this week?
So Getting Defensive this week is Dan Tentler, aka Vis. He talks to us about his experience running red team exercises, and also kind of the importance, and I'm a big advocate of this, the importance of people being balanced, right? Having experience with defense and offense, and the fact that that creates somebody who has a very good conception on what it takes to, properly defend and secure your environment. And I will go further and say, like, I think that's a concept that needs to be more diffuse throughout the organization, certainly throughout like IT type functions. And so that's the discussion we had with Dan, and that should be coming out. We're recording this on Sunday night. It should be posted first thing Monday morning.
Nice. And hey, if you're interested in those, it's not on our normal podcast feed. It's a separate new feed. Go find Getting Defensive. Or on our YouTube channel, which the YouTube channel does have both the shows and Jerry's current short segments. And boy, the jokes just start to write themselves when we start putting out shorts.
That's right. I posted how I was playing with YouTube's shorts, and that just sounds very, very wrong. But hey, look, at some point we do hope to pay some bills with this, and if you interact with the shows through YouTube, that actually will help us. It doesn't necessarily cost you anything. If you do want to support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/defensivesec and leave a tip in the tip jar, and that would be most appreciated. The software that we're actually recording this on now costs a pretty penny, and we've invested in better audio equipment, though maybe that doesn't always come through. We're working on it.
Doesn't mean we're using it right.
We're working on it.
Yes.
Got to get the neighbor kids to come over and show us how to use it.
Right. But no, in all seriousness, I really appreciate those who do donate, and those who might in the future. We're actually thinking about doing some special events for our Patreon donors. So,
yeah.
At least we think they're special. The Patreon donors might be like, no, thank you, no, not a fan.
That's a little creepy now. Come on.
Yeah, get out of my house. Go. Why are you watching me sleep? Leave.
We just want you to be safe. That's all. All right.
Anyway.
So, anyhow, you can find the links to the stories we talked about on this podcast on our website at defensivesecurity.org. All of our back episodes are there as well. If you go to our YouTube channel, I think it's Defensive Podcasts.
That sounds right.
And it'll also be linked in from the Defensive Security post about this podcast episode. So I think we're trying to make this as consumable as possible. I hope you find this useful. If you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear it. You can leave a comment. You can send smoke signals, what have you. If you're on the Fediverse, you can ping me. If you're on X, you can ping Andy. And I guess beyond that, I guess we can talk about where they can find us. You can find me on the Fediverse at Jerry at infosec.exchange. Where can they find you?
I'm also on your fine Mastodon server, infosec.exchange, at Lurg, L-E-R-G, and also on X, at Lurg, L-E-R-G, and also on LinkedIn. So feel free to, not Lurg, but my name, Andrew Kalat. Feel free to hit me up. I usually will accept most connection requests if it's not an obvious salesperson trying to sell me something.
Yeah. Not to say that salespeople aren't allowed to listen to the show, but just
of course.
Let them know that why you're connecting.
To be honest, I get so many sales solicitations all day long. I just can't keep up with them. I can't respond to all of them. So it's just for my own sanity's sake of trying to manage my time.
Yeah, I rarely log into LinkedIn anymore because I have so many solicitations, and it just constantly reminds me that I'm no longer important and don't have a job. So.
Aw, Jerry, it's okay. Your cats think you're important.
That's true. It's true. All right. With that, we will talk again next week. Everybody, take care.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.